Did you get to hear any of the Regal interview or not yet?
Yes, I did.
Oh my goodness. Do you want to talk about that after?
We could talk about it now, since we're about to talk about him in the show.
This was like the most, like, it was like the most catastrophic story, followed by like Regal making, like, just one-upping his own story of like just how terrible of a state this guy was in, from neck problems to spinal fluid draining out of him, like just horrendous descriptions of what he went through, and being on death's door, nearly needing his leg amputated. This was a guy like 2018, just, and then gets to a story about like breaking his eye socket and having amnesia for 3 weeks, which was almost like a sidebar story, and was like not even his main focal point that he was explaining around this late 2018 hospitalization.
We're talking about the Talk Is Jericho interview that he released with William Regal, by the way, which John has a recap of in his daily update today. But yeah, it's like, it felt like one of those things where, you don't talk to a friend for quite a while, and then you catch up with him, and he has the craziest stories about, like, being in and out of hospitals. And we kind of got to experience that through Chris Jericho here, who, I mean, is a longtime friend of Regal's, but even he had no idea of all of this stuff that had happened to the man.
Oh, he said he kept a lot of this private. Like, he didn't, he didn't want, sympathy from people, but just got it all out here. And, it was a very emotional interview. Like, he was breaking down at certain points.
Goodness. Yeah.
And it was sort of just like his own kind of train of thought, because I have to imagine Jericho must have asked maybe 3 questions.
Pretty much, yeah. In fact, he said at the end they're going to do a part 2 because he probably didn't get to any of the questions he had originally intended to ask about, what's been going on. But like, it's interesting with Regal because it's not exactly like he's been out of the public spotlight. I feel like we've seen him pretty consistently throughout, the NXT run, popping up here and there. But
and also a role that if he did disappear for a few weeks, it's not as noticeable. But this was, at the end of 2018, I guess it was more pronounced of him.
But in this day and age, like, we know about everything that happens to these wrestlers. So the fact that like this much had happened to this man, that he was near death for so long, that he realized at some point that he was living with a broken neck for 30 years. It's incredible, the fact that he's managed to keep it quiet this long. I mean, of course, that's to his personality, it sounds like, but it also kind of tells you that, hey, it's been a long time since we heard from William Regal, and I mean really hear from the man, because he had a lot to say, a lot to get off his chest. It was very emotional, and he's a fantastic storyteller, of course.
Yeah, I mean, if you've read his book, and I reread his book not all that long ago, and it's like he's going through like all of the like substance abuse problems and what his body went through, and then going to India in 2003, which is briefly mentioned here, and almost died from that as well. And Jeez. And then it's so in this interview, he notes that it was in 1998 he was diagnosed with pericarditis, which is like a swelling of the sac-like tissue around the heart, and it can scar the heart. And it got, once his like in-ring career had like wound down, it began to like calcify, and they had to like remove like that calcification. And if they didn't, he would have had 6 months to live. So, he's having like heart surgery, and that just, and that seemed to lead to later with this spinal column issue where his spinal fluid was leaking. And he described this procedure of essentially they could not like cover the wound. The wound had to essentially heal on its own, and he had to stay in an upright position for 8 days, and they would come in and drain the fluid, which he described as just the most ungodly pain because it's setting off all of the nerves within his body, and just felt like his head was being chopped off.
He had also like somehow attributed, I wasn't exactly sure if it was this injury or a prior injury, but he attributed something to causing him throughout his career to staying up at night, which led to him getting into pills. That was the neck
issue. So in 93, he had a match with Ricky Steamboat, and it was like he did like, it sounded like he executed a bridging German and broke his neck on that. And, felt the pain of it. Like he I guess had like numbness or lost feeling, but his neck is so built up and strong that he was able to work through it and went through pretty much his career with a broken neck that he didn't get taken care of. So when he finally had to have surgery, this is 2014, they go in through the back and realize how bad it is, and that he's got this gel that has built up, like this hardened gel that has kept his neck together. And his explanation of it is that for years he has had such terrible sleeping problems that when he would try to sleep and adjust his neck, like the pain receptors would essentially shoot off like adrenaline as it would to like handle pain. And he'd get like adrenaline going through his body. And of course he cannot sleep from this. And he would go like 3 days without sleep would not be uncommon. So this is like 93 to 2014.
And of course, beyond the incredible pain and discomfort and lack of sleep, the more serious side effect is that he seems to believe that it led to his pill addiction, which I think is, the scarlet letter that's attached to the man's career for his entire life. And who knows, prevented him from achieving what sort of success and nearly probably ended his life on its own. So, incredibly heartbreaking, and also just like one of the more fascinating points of the interview was, I think, even though this was just an audio interview, you could hear the seriousness in the tone and the emotion in his voice when he talks about current wrestlers and neck injuries and needless head bumps.
And you hear Jericho's reaction, because this is taped just days after the Kingston match, and Jericho even saying like that was the one time. And I really get the sense he's never doing that one again.
Oh, he said.
But it's like, the timing of this, it was something. And he brought up the fact that he really thought that Mitsuharu Misawa's death would open up a lot of eyes. And I remember at the time when Misawa died, and I can't remember who I was interviewing, but it was like the Monday after on a Fight Network radio show, and having this exact conversation about this being a real crossroads for the industry when it comes to such a celebrated figure. And if there's any silver lining that this will, sway modern day performers away from this kind of thing. And it did not. But Regal had like the same, and this is someone who is scouting everyone worldwide. And, he has seen this up close and personal, and here he's living with the effects of, and someone that was like hardly getting dropped on his neck to the degree that some that we see.
Of course. Yeah. And of course, coming off of like, what had happened to Big E last week, it's all the more a serious of a message. But I think it's sort of like a glimpse into maybe the type of instruction and influence he might have on this AEW roster, which is very young and, clearly known for taking a whole lot of risk. So I think, just even for the wisdom and the longevity, in his career, and how much he's able to perhaps, help the longevity of this very young roster. I think he's an invaluable get for this company. There's another mention where, I was also like not really, I think, aware of just how plugged in to the scene he is. The man talks about going to PWG and just watching everything, knowing every single person, having to put together the NXT UK tournament on 2 days notice, and crying when he saw, the European wrestlers show up all just ready to go. So he's probably familiar with everybody in that roster.
Certainly. Like, that was the role of Regal, was to be like, he was like the conduit to so many of these like performers and getting them, on WWE's radar, and essentially like sifting through the pack of like who can make it, and going and holding all of these tryout camps and such. And what a giant ship. Like, he brought it up many times, like working with Canyon Seaman, and everything was about network content, growing the network. So what a drastic change over this last year and a half, where we're talking about going to all these different geographical locations, setting up NXT satellite groups, and boom, that is no longer a priority. We're not even putting documentaries that we have ready to go up on the network. It's a total shift. I do also want to note, and it was, brought up at least a handful of times here, like WWE took great care of this guy. And there are, there are many people that if they had a fraction of these problems would not have the means to take care of them. And that's a sad reality of the healthcare system. And he was in a company that took exceptionally great care of him, and extremely expensive treatments, experimental treatments, various operations. And I think the company certainly deserves a lot of credit for that.
And a company that gave him a lot of chances, over the course of several decades.
Yes.
So I don't think you'll ever hear a bad word from William Regal against the WWE. And I think there are times where we really should, I think, applaud the company for being able to take care of a certain number of its performers like that.
Mm-hmm. So if you haven't heard the interview, like it's like it's a tough listen, but it's he is very detailed, and it's a miracle he has come out at like this stage. I'm sure his day to day is not pain free by any stretch, but it's miraculous what this man has been through.
Yeah.